Good evening, Your Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, military attachés. Well, it's a pleasure to have you here for hearing about a long past war, but that meant so much for us, both wars. They have the peculiar way into, they have the ways into our society. Both of them were pretty significant for us. They changed the way, I believe, the world would see Brazil, but also the way that Brazil would see the world as it is, and how would it feel the reality of what is it to become a nation on its own, with its own responsibilities. So I'd like to introduce this word about Sherman, General Sherman, who some might know it's general of the Federation troops in the American Civil War. One thing that is said about him is that war is hell. There is nothing beautiful about it, but then again, it is maybe the only situation where societies commune to celebrate its beginning and to celebrate the end of it. It's not a happy occasion, but there are celebrations, and many people wish to join, and when they're in, what comes to our minds, and mine as a historian, is that what allowed these people, what caused them to premeditate, prepare, and execute mass killing in name of an ideal, in name of a common cause, and then feel sorry and feel happy about it, to be ashamed and proud of. So war should never exist. Actually, today we are here to pay some homage to our Brazilian heroes fallen in the field, as many as at the time enemies, because there should be no such thing, but it happens. And whenever it's necessary, we should be prepared for it. So it's a paradox in many ways. So I'd like to start with preparations of how was the situation in Brazil to join the First World War. At the time, Brazil was basically a rural country with the majority of its population still illiterate, with logistics difficulties. And 1914, well, we could say we had 25 years past slavery abolishing in the country. It was not an easy meeting with modernity in many ways. We would have no industries. We're basically a country that would export coffee and commodities. No really big ambitions. Diplomacy was still a very present theme. One of our biggest national heroes, Barão do Rio Branco, who was Minister of Foreign Affairs, and managed to agree to all the frontiers in Brazil. So we actually were never a bellicist a bellicist nation, and we actually don't have any frontier problems with our neighbors. That's, I think, the basic the reason why we don't have conflicts in our region. Brazil is big, so lots of neighbors, so let's settle things first on the table, much better. And then we come to this situation. The first 3 years, basically, we faced some problems. We were not big beef exporters like Argentina was, who felt a brunt of the war because of a few years earlier there was invented the refrigerated container, which would manage large countries with large pastures and all to export beef to Europe. Or, well, it was the most important market for them. And German submarine warfare, war doctrine, caused lots of problems, economical problems to these countries, as much as caused to Brazil. So, when the Germans decide that, well, we're going to shield and blockade Europe from that. well, Brazil is largely affected, and Brazilian ships begin to be sunk. By then, public opinion turns to say, well, this is wrong, and given the proximity between Brazil and the United States, Brazil comes to declare war against Germany and Austro-Hungary Empire. So one thing that, well, we did it, now how can we mobilize our troops? Well, we've had an army, an imperial army, since the Paraguayan War, which was the second biggest conflict in Americas, the first one being the Civil War, Succession War in the United States. And then we have these actions that happen. Well, two main battle cruisers, Brazilian battle cruisers, patrolling the Atlantic waters, going up to Dakar, engaging some German submarines in some occasions, close to the end of the war, because we declared war in 1917. It was when things really got complicated for us, because the economy was really suffering from coffee exports being sunk. Then some other points were important here, especially because the effects on the Second World War. Before that, we would have an army basically on somehow old-fashioned weapons, cavalry with a saber, the most traditional 19th century stuff. Then we were exposed to a new reality, the total war, which is not easy to understand in the first moment, and lots of new ways to be more efficient, to have tactical means. Doctrine evolution was staggering at the point. And then we managed to make some aviators, which was a curious thing. Brazil would have aviators fighting along the Royal Air Force. The main objective on that was to acquire some technology, come back to Brazil, and they were split between the Army and the Navy, given the origins to the Army aviation and Navy aviation. This would generate some consequences, good for Brazil, about modernization. Medical officers joined the French front, close to the breakthrough that happened with the tanks. They were joining the war at that point. And also, Brazil managed to say, well, we got two battle cruisers, we may not be able to provide a safe escort for our ships, but we can manage to do something about the Western African coast. And they were sent there, they engaged the Germans, but I think the most special contribution Brazil was able to make was to send medical supplies. They were really shorted at some points, especially because at the time there was the Spanish flu, the flu that was killing millions in Europe. And with these medicines, lots of deaths would be avoided. And in many times, given the flu was originated in Africa, the soldiers could not take a bigger engagement in Europe, so it was being restricted to that area. So the outcome, to quickly speak, would be the only South America to directly engage the enemy with a national force being sent to do something overseas. And it is curious because the Navy at the time would have the major role on that, the most readiness, battle readiness at the point. And the Army and the Air Force, well, the Air Force, that was known. Those guys were learning from the Royal Air Force. But the Navy was ready, the Navy went there. We had dreadnoughts at the time. And at that point, it was something of a difficult thing for us because the Brazilian Army were always composed by lots of races, mixed races. Actually, it was raised from the society to join to join forces, whites, blacks, natives. So in the army they were all equal. And during the slavery abolition in Brazil, there was no civil rights issue because when they were freed, all the former slaves would have total civil rights from one point to the other. So it was all in one stage. It was a big impact in the society. So there was a rise in export of commodities, especially rubber from the trees. It was a big boom because tires were made of that, and that was the main composite. You have cotton and coffee. So basically the country exports commodities, right? But you have some early industrialization, the initial steps, like, well, canned food. We wouldn't have it. It was imported. And since you have canned food, you have a can factory and so on. Also, ammunition. Well, we used to buy ammunition for training. Now there are simply no ammunition available in the market, so we would have to make it ourselves. How to? Well, we got to learn. And then all these things, like car assembly manufacturing, you have lots of consequences on that. And also, when we engage in such conflict, you have a modernization of the armed forces. Whoever goes there say, hey, they operate in another way. So you have a really powerful influx of First World War doctrine, but not the World War doctrine of sending people in front of machine guns, like Clausewitz would say, that, well, we need to fight them. The important is the offensive move. It's only the offensive, no matter what. Well, Clausewitz started that with Napoleon. There was no machine guns at the time. But the Brazilians were seeing things from perspective from the winning side, where mobility was becoming something of real importance instead of mass numbers of troops fighting and dying, young men dying and all that. So, well, there is an easy way to win wars. That thing about doctrine made a huge difference to Brazil. Such it was an impressive thing for those combatants that went there, the medical and a few military that were engaged in that we bought 12 tanks from the French. Renault, sorry, FT-17 tanks. And also we saw the need of a fleet modernization. Because, well, if I need it now, well, you don't have it. So, as Rui Barbosa would say, you don't, the fleets, it's such a thing that you don't improvise fleets. You have to think ahead, years ahead. So this was the main outcome for the society economy of the First World War. Then we got to the Second World War, the road to war. The pre-war situation in Brazil was quite complex at the time, right? Some diplomatic tensions with England. Why would that be? Well, basically because the British were taking, boarding some Brazilian ships, retaining their cargo, afraid of them being shipped to Germany. Well, the thing is, United States were the main commercial partner of Brazil, and Germany was the second. So wherever we wouldn't sell to the Americans, then we would sell to the Germans. We would need steel, so we would exchange steel for cotton in a way that, well, they don't have many money transactions. There was no internet, right? So we need to ship some cotton and to get some Flanders laminated steel. So, and we had at the time right-wing government quite inclined toward the national socialism prevailing in Italy and in Germany. No tendencies to blame this or that group from the society about the problems of this society, but still a feeling of being Brazilian. We gotta know our place, we gotta take care of ourselves. There was a really raising feeling like that about national socialism at the time. So that was Getúlio Vargas, who was in many ways a dictator in many times. In 1937, he says he signs up a new constitution. He decides that unilaterally people are complaining, there are still political issues, and the war is seen as an opportunity. Getúlio was a very clever man. Say, well, coffee is not giving all that money anymore. Our economy is based on coffee. We should focus on the industry, because in the end of the day, it is the best and easiest way for you to sell your workforce at a better price. It will bring prosperity, so it's a good idea. Then he goes with, well, there are some issues with England, some threats to diplomatic relations with rupture, which are quickly dissipated. Then we have a foreign policy that say, well, I would like to have a steel mill financed by the company. And the Germans say, well, I need all the steel I can have here. Well, okay, you might send some cannons and ammo for our army. So we have this particular situation with complicated things a bit. The army would support the German side. And the Navy would buy ships, maintenance, equipment, and everything from the United States. It's quite a Brazilian tradition not to buy everything from one supplier, even nowadays, right? And then you have a strong lobby for Brazil to allow the United States to use the geographical position of Natal with the northeastern point closest to Africa and the state of Rio Grande do Norte as a base. There was an airfield there, and they said, well, we need this point. Actually, during 1943 and 44, it was the busiest airfield in the whole Second World War, because there would be more than 10 landings and 100 landings and takeoffs per day. So it was really busy. So at this point, Brazil would join the Atlantic Charter, would say, well, we're under American umbrella here. There were some hostilities from Germany who would wish to have the Brazilian materials for the industries. At the time, Germany Brazilian rubber exports to Germany would be of 70% of their needs. So Brazil would provide 70% of German rubber needs. They would say, well, I cannot make tires without that. I cannot make anything that needs rubber without Brazilian supplying. And then the Brits were saying, no, you're not going to have it. So there are the tensions. And then when Brazil joins this side, by the side of the Allies, basically the United States influence, the Germans, on the imminence of feeling that Brazil would break up relations with them by American pressure, they begin to retaliate. And they declare a blockade from the whole American countries against England and all the allied posts in Africa and all. And that hits Brazil really hard, because we were selling things that we would need. It was the blood of our economy to sell things, to import things. We were really dependent on foreign trade, because it was not a really industrialized country. We wouldn't produce oil, gasoline, but we would have some cars, and we would have machines. Well, it was a complicated moment for the country. Then, the Axis retaliation really caused trouble. So, they sink Brazilian freighters. They were Italian submarines as well. And then we have Pearl Harbor, 1941. At this point, Brazil was really tending towards the United States. But there was still one point here and there. One thing that might not be obvious is that 30%, 20 to 30% of Brazilian population at the time were composed by German and Italian immigrants. The other 30% would say it's Portuguese, and then you have 35–40% of natives, mixed, former slaves. So, especially in the mid-south Brazil, they were German, they were Italian. They would speak Italian in São Paulo, they would speak German in Santa Catarina, Rio Grande do Sul, in these places. So, well, how can we mobilize our society against their customs, against their people? And this is something that Getúlio, the president, had to deal with quite delicately. But after so many sunk ships and so many deaths caused by the raidings, the public opinion swings towards the United States. And when the news about pursuing and hunting people making the things with Jews and the Holocaust, they say, no. That doesn't suit our feelings here. We don't think it's right, but so far it's not right, but it's there, right? It's far, and well, we're here. But then we begin to have real losses, and then we felt like murder. So we have this thing. The Americans come and say, okay, I really want your northeastern country, okay? And then even if Brazil wouldn't join them, or worse, if Brazil would decide to be pro-Axis at the time, there was a plan. They would invade northeastern Brazil and take the place for themselves, because it was one of the 4 most important places, strategical places considered by the Americans in the World War, which would be Natal, northeastern Brazil, Gibraltar, Suez, and Bosphorus, because they would allow, actually if the Axis would have Natal, or Brazil would join them, it would make things really difficult to supply, well, to well supply the troops that were fighting North Africa up against the Africa Corps. So it was important. Then the Americans come and say, okay, now we have a good relationship. Roosevelt had a good relationship with Getúlio Vargas. Getúlio's younger son had polio, like Roosevelt. So people say there were kind of mutual understanding, and they went along really well. So they come and say, okay, what do you want? And they say, well, we'd like to become an industrial country as well. Good, what do you want? What do you need? Well, we need steel. So 20 million to build the Companhia Siderúrgica Nacional, steel production, national siderurgic company. We need 100 million industry finance. We need to regulate your market for coffee imports. And we are going to have to review our cotton exports, because we have lots of nice markets that we would like to access. And they said, oh, well, we can make an effort for you to sell some cotton here and there. And then they said, well, we need iron ore, because we produce some, but you have one of the best on the planet. Said, right, so Getúlio creates the Vale do Rio Doce, which today is Vale, the biggest mining company in the world, I think. And they said, well, we need the rubber. We need that, because our South and East Asian suppliers, they are taken by the Japanese. So, well, we organized some recruitment for people from the Northeast. They were facing one of the biggest droughts in history, in 1942, to go to the Amazon and learn how to take rubber out, how to get it from the jungle. And they were sent in a national effort that they say, you can join the expeditionary force, or you can join the rubber soldiers. And many went for the rubber enterprise. And also, of course, since the military would go there, we received $350 million. That today it's some money, but at 1942, it was a lot of money, and it was a fraction, really a small fraction of what the equipment would cost to re-equip and train Brazilian forces. So with that, we have a really powerful American investment in Brazil. And that was not about money only. It also had a cultural bias and a cultural tendency, because Zé Carioca was a character from Disney that would incorporate, say, hey, Donald, Mickey, Zé Carioca, we're all together, we're friends, join us. And then Vargas allowed Roosevelt to establish the air base in Northeastern, to build, to improve and everything, under the airfield renewment, renovation program. That, in practical terms, were to build an air base in Natal. And then they begin to use the base as a condition for financing that. And then we have this, an increased, ever increased German campaign against Brazilian freighters, which would create the Brazilian Air Force, 1941, right? Say, well, we knew, how do the Americans operate in war? Well, they have an independent Air Force. Okay, take the aviators from the Army and the Navy, join them and make a third force. Because That's how modern armies are behaving now, modern military forces are operating now. And in January 1942, Brazil severs diplomatic relations with Axis powers, right? Because we thought it was so wrong, the Pearl Harbor thing. So, well, the Americans are friends. Again, the cultural investment of Americans and Brazil. And then we have 21 German, 2 Italian submarines, 36 Brazilian merchant ships sunk. This number, more than 600, almost 1,700 castaway crewmen, more than 1,000 deaths of innocent people trying to make a living sailing and selling things. But one thing triggered the tip the scale was when the U-boat 507 attacked the Bapendi, big Brazilian freighter, killing 270 people in territorial waters. That was something that could not be neglected anymore. The population decides to support the war, and then is declared state of belligerence. And well, just a second. It will come out. Okay. So what happens is that at that point, right, go on. At the 31st of August 1942, Brazil declares war against the Axis. And that comes with the Brazilian symbol of going to war again. That was formed the Brazilian Expeditionary Force, and then the Santa Pula, which here we have a legitimate representative here that's going to give a few words of wisdom here for us. That's the fighter squadron. So Navy would be worried about protecting the convoy ships, and Getúlio makes a movement like this. We want to cooperate in the war because we feel it was wrong, and we want to train our troops. We want you to train our troops in order for us to have better troops, and we want to fight wherever you say we will. And then the Americans say, okay, we'll train you. In the social mobilization, we have these practical effects. For a country that was still non-urban, rural, most population illiterate, 43 million people only in a country of the size of Australia, well, you imagine. But without the desert, it was a complicated thing. You have a few cities here and there where high-level education was sparse, but still, money was a hard thing to find at the time. So, to form the Brazilian Expeditionary Force, it was a huge national effort. The idea was to send 100,000 men, prepared men, to combat in Europe. It was not possible, really, not feasible, it was not. And we felt, the military felt at the time, well, we might send these people, but they're not prepared, they're just going to die, and we're not going to make any difference. Actually, we're going to be a problem more than a solution, so we need to train these guys. Then, before. Okay, that would cause an increase in a few years of almost doubling the size of the army. For that you need trained officers, trained sergeants, trained people, uniforms, armament, things that we would not have, but the Americans would have to provide us. In the meantime, the Americans were having to provide stuff for pretty much anyone. And so Brazil was a priority, yes, but there are demands everywhere. And also, that would mean that in the end, what Brazil managed to make is to deploy more than 15% of its troops overseas, leaving the least prepared behind to guard the territory. One thing is to imagine, well, I've got a 75,000 people army. They are able somehow to defend the country. Another thing is that, well, I have 75,000 and I have to send 100,000 overseas. It's not easy to prepare these guys, especially if you have to train them to face the modern war. And now again, the modern war. You don't have the resources, you don't have the technology. You got to train them, guard them back, make things run, and then present a decent combatant force. That was the big challenge, right? So the Americans said, well, you want to join us? You will have to adopt our doctrine, 1 by 3. 1 regiment, 3 battalions, 1 battalion, 3 companies, 3 companies, 3 platoons. 1 company, 3 platoons, and that's the way. And, well, you got to give me 3 divisions to make an Army Corps. Well, we, in the end, we managed only to give them 1. But it was the best we could provide. It was a big effort. So, and they said, well, we need some nurses because they're hard to find. And we said, well, we also need them because they're hard to train. So the voluntaries, they were all voluntaries, and the nurses were sent. Lots of national propaganda, Brazil on war, opened the fields for victory. You see the German subs, they were causing really pain. And all of the magazines, Cruzeiro was a traditional magazine at the time, advertising that women could join. And war policies, well, people, nationalists were revigorated in many ways, and one of the ways to show that up is that Brazilians would buy national war bonuses to be paid in special conditions. Actually, they were giving money for the government to achieve its objective. 500% of a yearly budget was the cost of that. And in the end, things were proving really difficult. War was going on. When we declared war, we didn't know, well, we don't know who was going to win, right? Germany was still pretty much inside Russia and all. Everybody here has a really, I believe, some notion of how tough things were. And we had to prepare. Now, people say, well, if Brazil goes to war, send a really decent regiment and a division, if we engage them and we do our jobs, the snake would smoke. That's not going to happen. Really, it's easier if a snake would smoke. Then, just one thing. There, the symbol, the snake smoke, we were there. And so we managed to have some industrial development. Of course, we had a steel mill, we have iron ore extraction, all the primary industry stuff we're putting together. Then, as I said, 1941, Brazilian Air Force is created, and the first backbone of that was the first Grupo Aéreo de Combate, first fight squadron, right? They would use, they were trained with the P-40s in the United States and in Panama, but when they got there, the P-47 was a Thunderbolt, was a really robust plane that wouldn't have all that big autonomy as the P-51 Mustang. So they were relocated to Italy, and one of the most modern airplanes there. The point is, that it was a fantastic plane for close air support, ground attack. And when the Brazilians got there, they said, hey, we have flashy news for you. You're going to bombard the soil in battlefield interdiction mission. They said, oh, nice. We had some training on that. But also in dogfight? No, we already have air superiority. We are going to focus on finding targets on the ground. And one particular thing is that it is way much more dangerous to find a target on the ground because whoever is on the ground don't like to be fired at. They prepare themselves with artillery, with flag, with everything they have to guard their possessions. So, we managed to send 49 pilots, which there were no replacement. They were everything we had, and more than 400 mechanics and all, which more details you will hear from him and the movie. So the main Brazilian engagement was in the Gothic line. When we managed to get there in 1944, we managed to send 34 troops, 1 division, 1 artillery group with 4 groups, with cannons, everything provided and on the spot by the Americans. And it was funny because the Americans would say, well, you didn't bring your own guns. No. Your President Roosevelt said that we would have the same thing you're fighting with. And there are some funny stories about it. Engineering Battalion, Medical Battalion, Scout Company, and a Scout Air Wing as well. They were from the Brazilian Air Force. And the participating counter in the Gothic line, Brazil took the left part of the conflict with the main objective to reach Bologna. On the right, New Zealand was there. So the reality, it was a multinational force, but the Kiwis were fighting a few dozen kilometers to the right, the same difficult mountain terrain. And the mountain terrain caused us the most of the trouble because we were not trained for that, right? There were all these small contingents. France was not still invaded. We wouldn't have Omaha Beach yet, D-Day, we wouldn't. So Italy was still an important battleground at the time. And the German and Italian divisions that were fighting, they were not civil divisions. They were Stalingrad veterans that were dragged from the Eastern Front and put on the Italian, to defend the Italian north, the northern Italy, which was the vale of the River Po, which was the most industrialized position there in Italy. So, the most significant for us battle, the main engagements, one is Monte Castello, which proved to be as difficult for us as it was Mount Cassino for many New Zealanders that know the history. The first problem is that, well, if anyone here who is not Brazilian has gone to Brazil, and the coolest night of the winter, once a year we have 16, 17 degrees on the streets. These guys were fighting minus 20, and they were not prepared for that. So all that cold, all that difficulty comes out, and everything becomes difficult when you're not prepared for that. You're simply not used for that. You're not used to it, so you gotta believe in something else to go there. Minus 20, and I don't have a cold. No training to operate in mountains, and those were seasoned opposition, trained veterans, and they knew there were a new group there, and they attacked, and they caused really a big loss to Brazil. So the baptisms of fire was a thing that said, well, this is real war. Okay, we trained, but nothing would prepare us for that. And the preparation had always its difficulties. One funny story is that guava cans were used in the fields, buried in the fields, for the people to train about mine diffusion, because there were no mines. So we used guava cans to train how to do it, how to find it in Brazil. So the equipment was scarce. That was a 232 Infantry Division, some paratroopers and some SS troops. It was a strongly defended point. They had around 9,000 troops there. Terrain disadvantage because it was a mount, like Monte Cassino. It was a twin in many ways. We had 4 attempts to take the objective, and the combined attack with the Santa Pua, and lots of Brazilians died there. Those were the casualties, not obligatory deaths, but many never recovered, and they were simply dismissed from the war. It was a bloodbath for us, for a division of 25,000 men that were 15,000 engaged. It was a real mess, but we got it after months of fight. Brazil was racing to prove its veil before the winter would fall. Right? So the next main engagement was Castel Novo, when another thing came out and said, well, what we are going to expect here. First thing about the traps, they would leave a bag with a watch, a nice thing dropped here and there, and then an innocent soldier would grab it and it would explode a mine. So there was a mining field. Complicated thing for someone that was trained basically to, well, let's fight the war, not worry about somebody that just retreated, making our advance so difficult. But we managed to get there with precise tactical execution. Marechal Mascarenhas Moraes was a really cunning man and really diligent. So with diligence and cunning, he managed to flank a position. But still, veteran troops trained to make the advance of the enemy difficult, or as difficult as possible. Then the next one was Maltese. It was the first time that the Brazilians were given by the American Army the command of the operation, give me Montesi. Because by then, the Americans would feel confident about giving them some more responsibilities. Say, these are not rookies anymore. And then we managed to get it. It was a strong standing against Allies because it was the last bastion of defense against them invading and getting Bologna and the industries there. So there was a strategic value. The terrain was complicated. Disadvantage, mountains again. Stalingrad veteran troops, and it was an attrition war because there were snipers. It was an urban terrain. The thing that you enter, every door you have a trap, you have a soldier, so the attrition is big, the morale gets complicated. But Brazilians held the position against the counter-strike 2 days later. And that proved definitely that they were worthy. They were even mentioned by the general comments, these guys know how to pick a fight. They seem crazy, they want to prove themselves. We're not here just to go home with something, we were there to fight for something that we believe is right. So, and one of the things interesting back then is that the Brazilians would get there, and at the time Italy was having really trouble with the society about the partisan and the people fighting for the exes, others fighting for liberty. The Brazilians would come in with a smile, give some food because there was a lot of starvation in Italy at the time. And what happened is that differently than the American perspective of a battle season and unit to say professionally this and that, the Brazilians would feel like it's well, many soldiers, lots of them, the majority, were from poor classes. They said, well, I also starved once, so they would give away their food for the civil population. And the gratitude for the Italians were big, such as the Piazza Brasile. But we lost lots of lives there too. And the last one is perhaps the most significant. It was the first Italian, in an Italian battleground theater operation, the first German division to surrender completely before the armistice, the first and the only. There was another one where there was news that Hitler was dead, you know, but in combat, about the strategic surrounding, they said, well, surrender, please. And then they would not. And then the Brazilian army would convince a priest to say that, well, go there. Tell them that it's pointless to fight. You're 15,000 men, you're going to be killed. Stop it. They would resist. They would still have means to resist. But say, oh, look, you're surrendering to Brazil. Okay, we're nice. And they demanded some conditions, and then the Mascarenhas said, send me your wounded first. 800 wounded, and we'll take care of them. Then you can come and surrender yourself. You're not going to be mistreated. That was something kind of innovative. Today it might make lots of sense, but in 1944 or 45, that wouldn't. So, again, the Brazilian way to negotiate things, trying to get the best outcome. Lots of lives were saved that day, but it was a significant surrender. 2 generals, 1,500 vehicles, 80 guns, all fully loaded, they are ready to fight. And there were the Panzer Grenadier and the Bersaglieri. It was the pride of the armored corps of the Italian army. So, now some statistics about the Santa Pula. They were used to fly in Brazil without radar, without anything. The standard American pilot would fly 25 missions and go home. That's your contribution to the war. Well, the Brazilians wouldn't have that. Somebody would die, they would fly more. We need to man those planes. And the movie will show you that. So with 5% overall missions, they managed to have 16 airplanes shut down. They were abrasive, right? 8 people were killed. But 85% of all ammunition depots were destroyed by these 5% sorties. The ammunition and fuel, as you can see here, they're the top most important, vital things about battleground interdiction. And the Brazilians were there. So as we say in Brazil, eu não vou perder viagem, né? I will not let things just in blank. I got to destroy something, and I will be in the air until I find a target. And they would go here and there and find lots of places to unload the ammo of their planes. It was kind of a shame to go back home saying, well, I didn't fire a single shot. No, no, no. I fully unloaded the thing there. Go see the thing. And this unit, the Setapula, received the United States Presidential Unit citation. It was the third non-U.S. unit to receive it in whole history until now. The other one was a Royal Air Force unit that fought in Battle of England, 1941. Then the Setapula, because of the effectiveness of the fighters, the disposition, the eagerness to fight, the seriousness, and the quickness that the airplane would be ready for battle again. That was something really impressive. It impressed the high command there. So it was a big honor for us Brazilians to have that. Then, in the end, we managed to capture almost 20,000 men. We lost 465 people, which is a drop in the ocean, we know, but it was a great thing and effort for a country that was far from the conflict, but was there because the population felt it was right, even against the main political forces that were more aligned with the Axis policies in many ways about national socialism, not about persecuting anyone here and there, but about the political tendencies about authoritarianism and all that, the right wing. So we had lots of wounded, missing actions, and there is a heritage military monument in honor of Brazilian army and soldiers in Pistoia, Italy, where the bodies of Brazilians were buried, and then they were moved back to Brazil. In 1960, and then 67, the monument was erected there. Today, the present forces managed to evolve to a different pattern, a different level. We are planning to, in the 2020, 2022, to have a fully operational nuclear-powered submarine with the Scorpion class in cooperation with the French, but we are going to build the submarine there in Brazil. Brazil participates, actively participates, has a really thriving military industry. In the United Nations peacekeeping operations, this industry is from Haiti. We've been there for more than 10 years now, commanding the operation, which is unique, since United Nations operations always have a rotating command. Brazil retains the command of Haiti for more than 10 years. And we have, in the Air Force, we got the coming Gripen MG, next generation, is a project, combined project with Brazil and Sweden. It's a new fighter to rival, in many ways, the Hornet and the Rafale. It will be the next backbone of Brazilian Air Force as a new plane, super cruise speed and all. And the new pride of the fleet is the KC-390 to replace the Hercules. Tailor-made for the Brazilian Air Force, which was the video they had put on the internet. They were planning to make the first prototype and to fly even in this year, as you've seen the movie here before. And then we have the good news about this development, this KC-390. This is basically the rollout of the KC-390. It was a plan to make it happen, and it happened now. Now Boeing has offered Embraer to sell the plane, and Federal Express already have put an order for 2. And basically it is a plane with lots of capabilities, tailor-made for Brazil, but also it's economical, it's viable in many ways, and will have an important participation in replacing the Hercules. And it's ready. The first one is ready with the Argentinian participation. Czech Republic and Portugal, which are already saying that we're going to buy it, we're going to help the project, we're going to build together with you. So the Air Force from the Santa Pura was the beginning, now is able, in combination with the industry, to build such a thing like this that can simply put down fires in forests and transport wounded, evacuations, and also flight, fueling, and all. So this is the reality of the Brazilian Air Force.